Hey there! Did you know that more than 90% of people watching haven't subscribed yet? If you're enjoying the stories we share, just take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It's totally free and helps us keep creating the content you love. My name is Natalie. I'm 34 years old, a stay-at-home mom living in a quiet neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio. I've been married to my husband, Dan, for nearly 8 years. We have a 5-year-old son named Ethan, who's the light of my life. I love him more than anything in the world. If you asked me a few years ago what I thought my life would be like now, I would have said peaceful, maybe a little routine, but safe. Simple. I didn't think I'd ever find myself feeling lost. I met Dan when I was 24. We worked in the same office building, he in finance, me as a receptionist while I was finishing my degree in early childhood education. He was quiet, smart, steady. He wasn't the type to draw attention, but he had this calm energy that felt safe. After a few casual chats in the lobby and elevator, he asked me out. We got married 2 years later, moved into a modest 2-bedroom home, and a year after that, Ethan was born. I stopped working after Ethan came along. At first, I was happy to do it. I loved being a mom, loved watching every little milestone from his first word to his first steps. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel like I was disappearing into the walls of our home. Dan was a good man, one reliable, responsible, faithful. But as Ethan grew, it felt like Dan and I were becoming more like roommates who managed the house together than partners in love. It started subtly. Dan would come home from work tired, barely say hello before disappearing into his laptop or turning on the news. Dinner became quiet. Conversations felt shallow. Schedules, errands, reminders about bills. I told myself it was just a phase, that marriage had seasons, and this was just a dry one. But months went by, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was invisible. I began to resent how alone I felt, even while living under the same roof as the man I married. I tried to tell Dan how I was feeling once. We were folding laundry in the living room, and I said, "I miss us." He looked at me, confused, like I was speaking another language. He said, "I'm doing the best I can, Nat. I work hard for this family." And that was it. No deeper talk, no questions, just a silent wall between us. Then we got a new neighbor. His name was Jake. Jake moved into the house next door with his dog, Max. He was around 40, single, recently divorced, no kids. The first time I saw him, I was taking out the trash, and he waved. We exchanged names, small talk, nothing special, but over the next few weeks, he'd make an effort to chat when he saw me, asking about the neighborhood, complimenting the garden I was working on, occasionally offering to help carry heavy bags if he saw me struggling. He was friendly, easygoing, and more than anything, he listened. I didn't think anything of it at first. He was just being nice, but something about the way he looked me in the eye when I spoke made me feel seen again. I hadn't realized how much I missed that, being acknowledged, being asked how I was doing, and knowing the person genuinely cared about the answer. One morning, I was outside with Ethan while he played on the swing set. Jake came over to say hi, and we started talking, just harmless chatting. I don't even remember what started it, but I ended up laughing at something he said. A real laugh, the kind I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. That afternoon stayed with me longer than I expected. It wasn't about attraction at first. It was about feeling like a woman again, not just a mom or a wife on autopilot. A few days later, I bumped into Jake at the grocery store. We stood in the produce aisle talking like old friends. He made a joke about me always picking the best apples, and I laughed again. It was silly, but I walked away from that encounter smiling. When I came home, Dan barely looked up from his phone. "Did you get the paper towels?" he asked. I nodded. That was it. I started running into Jake more often, on walks, outside by the mailbox, quick waves from our driveways. Eventually, we started texting. It started with things like, "Hey, there's a package on your porch," or "Max got out again. Sorry if he barked at your window." Then it turned into longer messages, conversations about books, music, life, things I hadn't talked about in forever. It wasn't until one Friday afternoon that I realized I'd crossed a line. Dan was working late, and Ethan was at a play date. Jake texted and said Max had chewed through his screen door again and asked if I knew a good handyman. I told him I had a spare toolkit and could bring it by. He said I could come inside and take a look. Just friendly. I told myself that. I walked over carrying the toolkit, telling myself this was no big deal. We ended up sitting on his back porch talking for nearly an hour. He told me about his divorce, how lonely the house felt sometimes. I told him how motherhood had changed me, how marriage wasn't what I expected it to be. We didn't touch. We didn't even stand close, but something passed between us, something unspoken but powerful. I left quickly after that, heart pounding, ashamed and confused. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how easy it was to talk to him, how natural it felt, and how wrong it was at the same time. I kept asking myself, was I really that unhappy? Was I that starved for attention? Or was I just selfish? Dan noticed something was off. He asked if I was okay, and I told him I was just tired. He nodded and went back to his spreadsheet. And that, in a way, said everything. Over the next few weeks, I tried to avoid Jake. I didn't answer texts right away. I stayed inside more. I focused on Ethan, played with him more intentionally, cooked dinner from scratch. I thought maybe if I poured myself into my home, the emptiness would go away. But the loneliness didn't leave. If anything, it got louder. Then, one day, Jake texted me a photo of a flower that had grown near the fence between our houses. "Thought of you," the message said. I stared at the message for a long time. It was just a flower, but I knew what it meant. I didn't answer at first, but the next morning I sent back a simple message. "It's beautiful, thank you." From there, we started talking more again, only now the tone had changed. He complimented me more often, told me I had a beautiful smile, that I deserved to be happy. He said things Dan hadn't said in years, and I let him. One afternoon, Ethan had fallen asleep early after a long day at the park. I was folding laundry when Jake texted, "Come over for a few minutes just to talk." I hesitated. Everything in me said not to go, but another part, the part that was tired, craving something real, said I needed it. I walked over. And that's where the real story begins. The moment I stepped into Jake's house that afternoon, something shifted. It wasn't anything dramatic, no lines were crossed, but I felt it. The air between us changed. I remember looking around and noticing how quiet it was. No TV, no music, just the soft hum of his fridge and the ticking of a clock in the hallway. He offered me a glass of water, and I took it mostly because my hands needed something to hold. We sat at the kitchen table. He asked how I was doing, and I found myself opening up more than I'd meant to. I told him I felt tired all the time. Not physically, not even emotionally, really, just soul tired. Like I'd been stuck in a loop of laundry and lunchboxes and polite dinner conversations with no real feeling. I hadn't said those things out loud to anyone, not even to myself in the mirror. Jake didn't try to fix it. He just listened. "You know," he said, "it's okay to admit when something isn't working, even if you worked really hard to hold it all together." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at my glass, and then I nodded because the truth of that sentence hit me like a wave. We talked for almost 2 hours. I kept checking the baby monitor app on my phone to make sure Ethan was still napping, and he was. The house was still safe. Dan wasn't due home for another hour. Eventually, I stood to leave. I thanked him for the water, for listening, and as I turned to go, Jake said something that stopped me. "You don't have to go back to feeling invisible." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a second, I didn't feel like a mom or a tired wife or a woman who'd given up on herself. I felt seen just as I was. Back home, I moved around the house like I had weights in my chest. Ethan woke up, we made snacks, and by the time Dan walked through the door, everything was back in its place. But inside, I was spinning. Dan noticed something, I could tell. That night, while I was folding Ethan's pajamas, he stood in the doorway and said, "You've been different lately. Is everything okay?" I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to say, "No, things are not okay. I'm hurting. I feel like I've been standing in front of you shouting for years and you never looked up." But instead I said, "I'm just tired," and he said, "Yeah, me too," and walked away. That was the moment I knew we were speaking different languages entirely. The days that followed were filled with guilt. I cooked, cleaned, played with Ethan, smiled through bedtime stories. But inside, I was a knot of shame and longing. I knew I was walking a dangerous line. I hadn't done anything physical, but emotionally, my heart was starting to drift and I couldn't lie to myself about that anymore. Jake kept texting, but I responded less. I told myself I needed to pull back before things got worse. He didn't pressure me, but he didn't stop reaching out either. Then one afternoon, I ran into him while taking Ethan for a walk. We stopped in front of his yard while Ethan pet Max, his dog. Jake crouched beside him, smiling, tossing a tennis ball gently in the grass. He's great with kids, I said, trying to keep things light. Jake looked up at me and said, "You're great with him." We locked eyes for a moment, and then I quickly looked away. "I should get going," I said. Jake stood and nodded. "You don't have to feel bad for needing connection, Natalie. We all do." That night, I lay in bed next to Dan, wide awake. He was snoring lightly the way he always did when he fell into a deep sleep fast. I stared at the ceiling and felt like I was in someone else's life. I thought back to our wedding day, how he'd held my hand and promised to always be present, to always put us first. Somewhere along the way, those promises faded under mortgage payments, work deadlines, and early morning routines. But did I have the right to expect more? Wasn't this just how life goes? I didn't know what I wanted. I only knew what I didn't want. To keep feeling empty. Things escalated slowly. One day, Jake invited me over again. This time, it was under the pretense of helping him sort through some books he was giving away. He said he thought Ethan might like a few. I hesitated, then agreed. Ethan was at preschool. I told myself it was just about the books. I sat on his couch while he pulled out old picture books and chapter books from a box. We started reminiscing about our favorite childhood stories, and then, without warning, I started crying. Not just tears, real sobs. "I'm sorry," I said, wiping my face. I don't even know why I'm crying." Jake sat beside me and handed me a tissue. "You're overwhelmed. You've been carrying it all on your own for too long." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. He reached for my hand, held it gently. "You don't have to explain yourself to me. I see you." That was the moment something broke. Or maybe it was something that had already been broken, finally coming to the surface. I leaned into his shoulder and stayed there, just for a minute. No words, no expectations. After that day, I told myself I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep living a double life. Pretending with Dan, sneaking glances toward Jake, carrying guilt like a second skin. I needed clarity. I needed to understand what this really was. I talked to a friend of mine, someone I hadn't seen in a while but trusted. I didn't tell her everything, just that I felt disconnected from my husband, that I was confused, that I felt more like a live-in babysitter than a wife. She nodded. "I've been there," she said. "It doesn't always mean the marriage is over, but it means something has to change." So I tried one more time with Dan. I asked him if we could talk. We sat on the porch one night after Ethan went to sleep. I told him I didn't feel close to him anymore, that I felt like we were coexisting, not living. He looked surprised. "Why didn't you say anything before?" he asked. "I did," I said quietly. "You just weren't listening." He looked down at his hands. "I guess I've been in my own world." We talked for a while that night. It wasn't emotional or romantic, just honest. He said he knew he hadn't been present. That work stressed him out, and sometimes it felt easier to shut down than to engage. He didn't ask if there was someone else. I think part of him didn't want to know. After that night, things were a little better between us. He tried more. He came home a little earlier, made an effort to talk to me about something other than errands, but the distance was still there. And then one day, I saw Jake at the mailbox. He waved, I waved back. We didn't speak, but I felt something stir in me, a pull I couldn't fully name. I started asking myself hard questions. Was I really unhappy, or was I just lonely and looking for a way to feel alive again? Was I running toward Jake because I wanted a new life, or because I didn't know how to fix the one I already had? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew I couldn't stay stuck in the in-between forever. Something had to give. Somewhere between that quiet wave at the mailbox and the next few days, I realized I couldn't keep drifting through my life waiting for something or someone to choose for me. It had to be me. I had to be the one to face what I'd done and figure out where I stood, because the truth was, even if Dan didn't ask directly, even if Jake didn't push for more, I was standing in the middle of a broken bridge I'd helped crack. And Ethan was at the center of it all, watching his mom and dad, sensing that something didn't feel quite right in our house anymore. After that porch conversation with Dan, I noticed small changes. He started bringing home dinner once or twice a week without me asking. He sat with Ethan more at bedtime and asked about his day. Sometimes he'd reach for my hand when we were walking to the car or pass by me in the kitchen and rest his hand gently on my shoulder. It wasn't perfect, but I noticed it, and part of me ached with guilt because no matter how hard I tried to forget it, I knew what I'd done, even if there hadn't been anything physical between me. And Jake, I'd still stepped out emotionally. I'd found comfort in someone else, sought connection outside the home I'd built with Dan, and no matter how much I told myself it had been out of loneliness, it was still a betrayal of the promise we made. One afternoon, I sat in the backyard while Ethan napped inside. The fall wind carried the scent of leaves and something that reminded me of simpler times, before we had a mortgage, before life settled into predictable rhythms. I pulled out my phone and saw Jake's name. He hadn't texted in 2 days. I hadn't texted either. It was like we were both waiting to see who would blink first. I stared at the screen and for the first time didn't feel the rush I used to when I saw his name. Instead, I felt a strange kind of calm, a clear-headedness that hadn't been there before. I opened the message thread, stared at all the conversations we'd had, the long ones, the funny ones, the ones where I'd poured out feelings I never voiced to Dan, and I typed, "I need space. This connection meant something to me, but I can't keep walking down a path that doesn't belong to me. I hope you understand." I stared at it for a full minute before hitting send. Then I turned off my phone and sat there, not crying, not panicking, just breathing. That night, Dan and I sat on the couch after Ethan went to bed. The television played quietly in the background, but neither of us was really watching. I turned to him and said, "I need to tell you something." He looked over, concerned. "What is it?" My heart was pounding. "I formed an emotional connection with someone who isn't you." He went still, completely still. "I didn't plan it," I said quickly. "I was lonely. I didn't go looking for it, but it happened, and nothing physical ever happened, I swear. But I crossed a line. I talked to him about things I should have talked to you about. I'm sorry." He didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Is it still going on?" "No," I said. "I ended it today. I had to, because whatever we decide from here, I can't carry this secret anymore." Dan rubbed his hands together slowly, like he was trying to work through what he'd just heard. "Is that why you've been distant?" I nodded. "Part of it. But the distance started long before that. You know it did." He looked down, his eyes red. "Why didn't you come to me?" "I tried," I said softly. "Maybe not loud enough. Maybe not in the right way. But I felt like I was disappearing, Dan, and I didn't know how to get us back." He didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He just nodded slowly and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I need some time to think," he said. "I understand." The days after that were hard. He was quieter than usual, but not cold. He still helped with Ethan, still said good morning, still went through the motions, but I could see the weight of it on him. I gave him space. I also gave myself space. I started journaling again. I went for long walks in the mornings after Ethan got on the bus. I looked around our home, the little things that had made it ours. The photos on the fridge, the dried flowers in the kitchen jar, the crayon drawings Ethan had taped to the hallway wall. I remembered why I wanted this life in the first place. Not because it was perfect, but because it was built on one love. And love, as I was finally learning, isn't something that stays strong on its own. You have to feed it, tend to it, speak to it, or it goes quiet. One evening, Dan asked if I wanted to go for a drive after dinner. My heart skipped. I said yes. We drove out to the lake a few miles away, the same place he took me when he proposed. We didn't say much on the way there, just watched the road. When we parked, he turned off the engine and looked at me. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, "about us, about what you said, about what I didn't say all those times you were trying to reach me." I looked down, afraid to meet his eyes. "I didn't see it coming," he said, and that scares me because I thought we were okay. Not amazing, but okay. And now I realize how much I've been taking you for granted." Tears welled in my eyes. "I'm not saying I'm not hurt," he continued. "I am. But I also know I had a hand in this. I wasn't showing up for you the way I should have." I looked up, surprised. He reached across the console and took my hand. "I want to try. If you do, I want us to try again, but this time, for real, with everything out on the table." I squeezed his hand. "I want that too." We didn't solve everything that night, but it was a start. The following week, we found a counselor. We agreed to go once a week and really do the work. It wasn't always easy. Some sessions felt heavy, like we were dragging years of silence into the room. But there were breakthroughs too. We learned to speak honestly without blame. We learned to listen without defending. We learned how different our emotional needs had become and how to start meeting them again. We started going for walks together in the evenings after Ethan went to bed. Sometimes we talk about the past, other times we just held hands in silence. Slowly, I began to feel something shift between us. Not a return to who we used to be, but the beginning of who we could still become. Jake moved away a few months later. He left a short note in my mailbox. "Wishing you peace. Take care of yourself." I appreciated the closure. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Now, almost a year later, I look around at my life and see it differently. Our marriage isn't perfect, but it's real. We work at it every day. We ask questions, share thoughts, laugh again. Really laugh. Dan looks at me now with the same eyes I remember from years ago, only wiser, more awake. Ethan is thriving. He doesn't know all that happened, of course, but he knows his parents love each other. He feels safe. And in the end, that's what matters most to me. I don't excuse what I did. I own it. I was wrong to seek comfort outside my marriage, but I've learned from it. I've grown. So has Dan. We hit rock bottom and we chose to rebuild instead of walk away. I tell this story not because I'm proud of it, but because I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt lost in their own life. If you're reading this and you're in that space wondering if you're seen, if you matter, please know that you do. And whatever mistakes you've made, there's still room to heal, to learn, and to choose a better path forward. We did. And every day we keep choosing it again.